Hello.
Morning.
Thank you for joining. This is the Techos Angels Tuesday night discussion, and we've got a great cyber panel today. We've got some really great industry veterans in the cyber world, and this comes on the heels of this, in quotes, invasion of Ukraine. Not sure what that is yet, but definitely people are getting more nervous about cyber hacks on both the nation state and individual PC level. So just as a bit of an introduction, this is part of the Techos Angels series. Techos Angels is one of the largest angel groups in the country. We do a lot of investing through various direct angel investments and through a angel investment fund. And we definitely encourage startups, whether it be in cyber or e-commerce or other areas of technology, to come to techosangels.com to pitch their business ideas. And with that, I'll ask Chris Yang to kick off the panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And so we have a pretty packed schedule, so we've offered to do that. Let me introduce our panelists for tonight. We'll give each speaker about 2 to 3 minutes to do a self-intro. And during this time, feel free to talk about your company, your position, your background. And let's get started. So in no particular order, I will start with Ian, probably. Ian Patterson, CEO of Perlock Security.
Good evening. There I am. Very good to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to wear a couple of hats for the conversation. I am both a founder, having raised angel investment. I'm also an angel investor, and I'm also a cybersecurity guy. So I'll try and bring some different perspectives to the conversation here. Quick blurb: Perlock, we are a AI cybersecurity company, and we use human behavior as a form of authentication. And so it's called behavioral biometrics. So literally the way that you type on the keyboard and move the mouse, we can identify you as an individual person. And so we've packaged that up into some enterprise software. And our key markets are a combination of federal as well as commercial, so financial services, that type of thing. Took the company public a year and a bit ago, announced 2 acquisitions last year. I think 2022 is going to be very busy, both for us, but also for kind of the macro cyber market at large. And that's from a combination of cybercrime groups, potentially nation state conflict, plus kind of the usual run-of-the-mill ransomware and that type of thing. So really excited to be here, and I'll pass the mic.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Ian. So next up, we have Chris Kubik. Chris is the Chief Information Security Officer at Fidelis and formerly the CISO at an NSA. A pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and welcome everybody, and glad you were able to join us tonight. As Christopher said, I'm the CISO at Fidelis Cybersecurity. I've been with Fidelis for about 2 years now, and in the CISO seat, responsible for the security of our corporate infrastructure, but I also get involved working with our product development teams, really just on the overall security architecture and the capabilities of our cybersecurity tools. Also, as Christopher mentioned, prior to joining Fidelis, I spent a little over 30 years working at NSA and held a lot of interesting jobs there, all of them focused in one way or another on cybersecurity and really helping to defend government networks against sophisticated attackers. Kind of some of my final tours there before I retired, I was the chief security architect for NSA's cloud infrastructure. And as you can imagine, we had quite a few cloud systems there at NSA, so that was quite a big job. But my final tour there was as the CISO of NSA. So at Fidelis Cybersecurity, we develop and produce what we call a cybersecurity platform. We call it an XDR platform, or extended detection and response platform. The platform is really an approach that is able to pull together data from lots of different sensors located around the boundaries of the network, within the networks, on email sensors, web sensors, in the cloud, et cetera. We combine that with data that we pulled together from endpoints, from sensors we have located on endpoints. And then somewhat unique in the industry, we also have the ability to take kind of what we understand about the network from the sensors that we have and overlay on top of the network a bunch of deception decoys that kind of mimic the real world network. And we found this to be a very powerful cybersecurity tool because there's no reason for general users of the network to interact with deception decoys. So it's a very good tool for being able to detect, stealthy attacks like we're going to talk about tonight, within your network. And, we instrument those decoys to be able to collect lots of good, valuable information on what the attackers are up to. So it helps us to quickly kind of determine what they're up to and be able to block them within the networks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Alex Ruiz from 3GO. He's Chief Operating Officer at 3GO.
Good evening, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I think I'm the only one that's going to be providing more the consumer perspective. So really excited about that. A little bit about myself. For the last 20 years, I've been working in technology, really at the forefront of new adoption of technologies like mobile web, mobile phones. I was at a company that was acquired by Google called AdMob, where I was running their fraud team. And when we were looking at the transition from things like the mobile web to mobile apps and now to all those hybrids, looking how that was affecting consumers, I then went on to run a lot of the fraud teams at Google, thinking about their social products, their mobile products, Android, all these other components. And through that, witnessed so much of the complexity and multifaceted scams that were really coming at users and how difficult it was for users to really be able to protect themselves. That led to the creation of 3GO, which is a relatively recent startup where we're looking at how do we actually personalize cybersecurity, right? And take a lot of the methodologies that have been used at the enterprise level in terms of addressing, understanding a user and really being able to personalize a set of recommendations for them to help protect them. I firmly believe the last 2 years have been a watershed moment in that people have really been forced to be online, conduct more and more of their lives online, anywhere from vaccines to benefits to all these different components that have created more of a need and more of a desire for adoption for a structured approach to security for members, for users. So I'm super excited to talk to you tonight about that and all the other types of threats that are facing our consumers.
Thank you very much for joining, and thank you for bringing a totally different perspective on the consumer side. Last but not the least, we have Jason. Jason is a security solution architect from NetApp.
Yep, thank you, Chris. Jason Kessler with NetApp. I am the security solutions architect, and really my role with NetApp is to help educate our customers on the NetApp product line. And if you're not familiar with NetApp, NetApp is a cloud-led storage management company, software-based storage management company. We have everything from on-prem, cloud-based to everything. So we really are very focused on security and really wanting to protect and secure that real critical data that all of our customers have, as well as everybody else. So really that's us. A little history about me. Been in the industry for at least 25 years now. I've kind of lost track. Cut my teeth and grew up in one of the most secure and risk-adverse financial organizations, I would say pretty much in the world. And then from there, about 10 years ago, I moved over and started working with a lot of the DoD, intel agencies, a lot of our government agencies, and then moved into this role. So a lot of history, a lot of knowledge in things like air gap and all of those different security solutions that a lot of our real secure organizations are implementing now. So I'm going to take up probably the least amount of time of everybody, but that's really me. That's what NetApp is, and I'm looking forward for this conversation as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And before we get started, we'd like to do a really quick poll, right? Matt, do you want to put the poll up? So 2 really quick questions to kind of guide us, continue the rest of our discussion, right? One is related to Log4j. That's pretty much, it's a it's on the headlines pretty much most of December, and then we'll get into more of what it is and just a little bit, right? And the second question is related to how likely is a major cyber attack going to happen in weeks? So let's just try to get some answers from the audience. All right. It seems like about half of the audience tonight know about the incident, the Log4j instance, and then thinking that is a good chance of another attack coming soon, right, in the next week. So Log4j or Log4 shell vulnerability has been in the recent news headlines. We just talk about that. It's a really a revelation for the industry in terms of new class of attacks. And for those who are not familiar with Log4j, it is a widely used open source Java logging tool, right? And it's been used by many large enterprises, including my current employer, my current company. It's also on a Java stack. So this is a question for our panelists tonight, right? Although many organizations have now patched their Log4j instances, how can we shore up our cyber defenses and prevent similar type of vulnerabilities from happening in the future? Do you see concerns with using open source libraries in the future? Why don't we start with Chris? I'd love to hear your perspective on this one.
Sure. I'll start it off. I think I agree with you. It's really was certainly unprecedented just in the number of systems that were impacted by Log4j. Nearly every system on the internet, I think, had some level of Log4j software contained within it. But I think more interesting is, and it's really kind of a trend, is how quickly the attackers are able to weaponize the Log4j vulnerability and really turn it into a full-scale attack against systems that were connected to the internet. I think the other thing is it's safe to say that Log4j it's not going to be the last attack of this nature. So defenders really need to think about sort of how do they prepare themselves for the next Log4j type of an attack. And at least from my experience and really talking to our customers, the key there is being able to quickly do that damage assessment, understand what systems are vulnerable, understand if any of those vulnerable systems were successfully attacked. If so, have the attackers moved on to other systems, being able to trace through to where the attackers have gone, and then finally being able to quickly kind of respond, contain the attack, and put mitigations in place to prevent further damage to the system.
Thank you for your input. Do we have other panelists who want to speak on this particular topic?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tag on to that. I think Log4j is a great example of a piece of open source technology that a lot of people use and then kind of forget about, and you don't really remember if you have it or not until you see an advisory come out and say, "Hey, you guys might want to check your Java stack because there might be a huge oops contained within that." Obviously the Log4j fiasco was not ideal, particularly that it occurred over Christmas, and so there were definitely a decent amount of security teams that lost some family time during that time. I think what I see as an opportunity, and certainly kind of some of the direction that I see the security industry moving, is this idea of a software bill of materials, an SBOM. And so within each piece of software that you have, what are the individual components? Because if a programmer can take 2 lines of code and actually just write it in 1 line of code by including a library, they're going to do that. And so you have this huge, massive web of dependencies. And right now it's difficult to understand what's in those dependencies. And so this idea of a software bill of material is one that just from my vantage point, I'm seeing starting to have a bit of a groundswell to say, look, what are we actually running here? When we buy something from vendor X, what is contained within that? What's underlying that? Just so that you have the visibility. I mean, think of this as if you buy a box of cereal, you know what the ingredients are. And so if there's a problem, if the grain goes bad, then you can at least, there's some amount of traceability. And so the opportunity within this, albeit negative event, the opportunity for investors would be, maybe look for something within the supply chain, the software supply chain, that is indexing, identifying, tracing those different components, because there's a ton of attention that started from Log4j that's now moving to how do we prevent this again? And anytime you have those large changes, in my experience, represents a great investment opportunity.
So Ian, do you foresee that enterprise start moving away from open source libraries and start building their logging tools? Do you think that's a concern, or that's a trend going forward?
I don't think the answer is to not use open source. I mean, I'm personally of the view that open source is probably more robust because there is a higher degree of transparency. And if you had a proprietary log management system, you might just have more bugs. They're just harder to find. And arguably, you might have even less of an opportunity to go find it because you don't have people looking at the code. So I don't think that there's going to be a move to proprietary software, but just having that traceability of what software do you have, that allows you as the enterprise to have a much more comprehensive view of the risk posture that you actually have. When you understand everything that's running both in your stack and then also all the libraries that you included, it just provides more transparency and provides opportunity to try and deal with that risk, however it comes across.
One thing, Chris, if I could add, and this isn't exactly your question, but just from a consumer perspective, a lot of our members came to us and said, what does this mean for me? And it's often the case when you have sometimes these cybersecurity attacks that they don't know how it applies to them. And for us, personalization is a key component of that. And in many cases, it's about keeping your devices updated with the latest software, et cetera. But so much of what we see in the industry is sometimes either aimed at enterprises or not personal in nature. And I think that going back to opportunities, how do you bring this down to the layman and actually make them care about it? Because oftentimes those vulnerabilities are they're the ones that actually fall for those types of issues. And so how do you do that in a way that's both scalable and effective is, I think, a huge opportunity.
Great. Jason, do you have anything to add? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've really covered it. The software bill of materials is really going to be probably a big key in actually knowing where your vulnerabilities are coming from, where they lie and where they're coming. I love that idea. I think that needs to be way more adopted across the whole industry. And the same thing with just not even the bill of materials. It's like, well, then we look at the whole supply chain of software development. I mean, because it's just not just the libraries that come in, it's who else wrote, it's other things they're writing and who you are integrating with. So it is a bigger problem than just at the individual level knowing everything. So I don't want to go so far that the problem is unsolvable, because it may not be, but at the same time, there's actions that we could take to definitely help lower and mitigate that risk. One of the thoughts, so for me, just in a lot of ways, in the areas that I see, especially in the enterprise level. So I know when you're talking angel investors, that sometimes you're working on really smaller companies. We're talking, or some of those companies can be very big, grow to be very big companies very quickly in some cases. Just having the scalability and actually building in scalability for from the get-go with software, with the development of software, as well as what you're bringing in. I've seen some software that have grown so fast that the coming back and fixing the holes takes a lot more time because of how fast things grow. So just it's a balance that we have to put in the end, just in the industry to help mitigate these security risks that we're seeing.
Thank you. So aside from patching Log4j, what should business be doing in 2022, right, to prevent a cyber attack? I mean, could you talk about some of the current cyber threats out there? Does anyone want to go?
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in if you want me to. I mean, sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut somebody off. Is there somebody that wanted to jump in on that? Or?
Start it off.
All right, I'll start it off. So Log4j, it's what we call a 0-day vulnerability, which means that prior to detecting it, the defenders really didn't have any idea that this vulnerability existed, and so the challenge with these types of vulnerabilities is they're extremely difficult to detect, and they're extremely difficult to defend against, because there's no signatures that you can look for to say, yeah, I'm being actively probed for this vulnerability. And so really to detect these types of stealthy attacks, it requires really, I think, moving more and more to kind of analytics and machine learning that can pull together large sets of data and really look for correlations in the data, look for anomalies in the data that can be indicative of an ongoing attack, because you're not going to see the direct vulnerability, because it's as I said earlier, it's not yet known. So you have to look for those anomalous activity that sort of indicates that, hey, there's something odd going on here. And then you need a really good set of tools that allow your security analysts to be able to dive in on those anomalies and do a very thorough investigation around those anomalies to understand, is that just a unusual anomaly occurring on my network, or is it truly something that's indicative of attack? So I think more and more we're seeing a lot more capabilities out there that can do what we refer to as this kind of proactive defense, being able to detect anomalies and sort of trace and investigate anomalies, and use that as a way to find these more stealthy attacks in the networks.
Jason, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking, sorry, is making sure I was off mute. So I'm gonna kind of parrot Chris a little bit here. The user behavioral analysis, that ability to track what's going on, is something that we're seeing a big, huge trend now. Just because compromised credentials, rogue employees, rogue administrators, all of that is we got to be able to watch for that. And if you take a zero trust model or a zero trust architecture or thought process into all your organizations, you have to be able to track and understand what your users are doing to be able to actually track that down, look at it, that anomalous, that out of normal behavior that happens when you start to get hit with the cyber attack, if somebody has breached the network and is actually in the environment. So yeah, so totally that that machine learning, those systems that can actually do a lot of that is definitely something that I see is going to be a huge trend that's going forward in 2022.
I see. So I actually would like to get Alex's perspective from more of a consumer angle. And sorry to cut you off. I was just about to.
Actually, was going to build off of what Jason was saying. We have quite a few CISOs on our board, and often what the biggest thing they bemoan is that they put these amazing practices in place, but then the biggest vulnerability is people at the end of the day, right? And so you can try and capture that or get that as quickly as it happens, but ultimately that's what you're seeing a lot of the attacks are happening, is that they're preying off of people not understanding, or especially in the work from home scenario, where now people are outside of your firewall. They're using their whatever network they have at home and whatever best practices. And so increasingly, we've seen quite a few companies where somebody got phished or a password was given because they actually went to customer service or some of these other things. And so I think that as the attacks get more complex, they're increasingly going to be able to rely on people. And at the end of the day, 3GO, not to bring back 3GO too much, but what we're trying to do is work with companies that have large work from home populations, where we can augment their capabilities, their training, to really help them secure their overall network in a better way through training. And so I think that that's going to increasingly be the case, where especially on SMBs that don't have these amazing CISOs to create something for that company, that they're going to rely on just lack of knowledge and lack of best practices.
So because Chris started it and then Jason said the magic words, user behavior analytics, I feel somewhat comfortable then to be able to talk our own user behavior analytics. But I mean, Alex is exactly right. And I think he hit upon one item here, which is that work from home, this change from being predominantly based in office to going at home has a number of knock-on effects. And so just really big picture, if you can imagine going into a typical office building, you go in through the lobby, there's a security guard at the lobby, maybe you sign in, There's a pass card to get through the turnstile, go up the elevator, and then a physical key to the door. You've got at least 3 layers of security controls separating you from the hardware. And when you actually fire on that computer, desktop, laptop, whatever, you're on a corporate network behind firewalls, etc. When you go then and put 95% of the workforce back in a home environment, you lose all those physical controls. And so, I mean, just to give you some practical examples, our customers today are really concerned with who else is in the house, both from a security standpoint, but also from a compliance standpoint. A lot of us work in regulated industries, healthcare, anyone who deals with credit card data, PCI DSS, financial information. There's all sorts of effectively regulated data that you need to be sure about who is seeing, who is accessing that data. And so the concerns now are, you've got people working from home. It's an untrusted environment. They're not behind the corporate firewall, and so you just removed all these protections. But then you also have the problem, if you will, or the adversity of sometimes the users themselves don't want to work with your security controls. So very practical example. I mean, our software is designed to look at how you type, how you move the mouse, because what we have found is that in a lot of cases, just having an inactivity timeout, right? You walk away from the device and it locks your screen. Well, we're actually getting requests, hey, can you help us? Because people are buying mouse wigglers. So this is actually, you can buy them on Amazon for 20 bucks, and it'll look like it's a mouse. You plug it into the USB stick and it just moves your cursor every now and again so that people don't get logged off. And so we as security professionals are trying to deal with the fact that if we put too many controls in place, it's going to piss off the people who are trying to get work done, right? Their job is not to jump through our security hoops. Their job is to whatever, I mean, trade in the market or do banking, like whatever it is. And so we have to create security opportunities to still authenticate those users, to still protect them, but also do so in a way that is hopefully invisible to them or at least doesn't impede them. And so again, the net from all of this, the opportunity is if there is a cybersecurity investment that reduces friction for the end users, those are always super interesting, because usually the response is, hey, if you've got a vulnerability, let's make it harder to get to. Let's make it harder to use. Let's add all these constraints, which doesn't really help the end user.
Yeah, I definitely felt a lot of pain point when we were developing custom software. This was a couple of months ago when all of us are working remotely and then we're developing against a vendor software system that's behind a firewall. And all of a sudden we need to whitelist every single of our developers' IP. And then that really caused some concerns on the other side, just put it that way. So I definitely felt the pain right there. Yeah. So speaking of ML, right, the ML cybersecurity market is growing at an unprecedented pace. We all agree that, including network monitoring, endpoint protection we talked about, and even code review. So although we are well versed with the benefits of AI-based cybersecurity, what would you think be the biggest challenge going forward or a limitation on the path? So maybe we'll start with Alex this time. How's that? Yeah.
Sure. I think this is a super interesting. From what we've seen is that, and I think that Ian said it really well, right? It's like, how do you create processes, especially in a zero trust environment, that help you detect when anomalies happen quickly. I think what we've found and what my experience for the last 20 years has been is that, the bad guys, fraudsters, et cetera, can move very quickly and get around these. So it has to be a combination of user education and adoption, as well as creating these pieces. So I think ML is amazing for going after known threats, and to the extent, we see patterns, but to the extent that it is something completely new, there is, you still need some of that manual intervention. And at least from a user standpoint, people aren't investing in doing a lot of ML for the home. And so you need to augment that with other tools. But I think that there's just a lot of potential for known threats for that to work really well. But the other panelists might disagree with this.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, being a company that leverages AI and machine learning to try and identify people based on their behavior, what I would say is that these algorithms are just a tool like anything else. There's nothing inherently special or magic about these tools. Now, if you apply these tools to the right problem, they can be very, very effective, but not all problems are good for using machine learning. And so like a great example, like a very basic example of this is if there's no feedback loop to train the model, using machine learning is not going to get you anywhere. In fact, it's going to be a very frustrating experience. So a classic example here is if you create a set of security alerts, and then those security alerts get sent back to somebody in the security operations center, the SOC, and then the SOC analyst goes and trains the system. Great, in theory, that works really well. Well, what I think happens in practice is that cybersecurity as an industry has a negative unemployment. So we're short 4 million people to be able to do the cybersecurity jobs. And so if your value proposition to an enterprise is, hey, we're going to use machine learning, we're going to create work for your security analysts to train the models on a regular basis, that may or may not be effective, right? And so again, not all problems need or should use machine learning as a solution. And this is the same thing that we saw with signatures. And it's the same thing that we saw with rule-based approaches. There are certain access control systems where rules are great, and there are certain antivirus situations where signatures are great. And again, there are certain data-centric problems where machine learning is great, but it's not a panacea for all problems. Now, Chris, you're welcome to disagree. Being the SOC guy on the call.
Yeah, no, I will actually support what you say there, Ian. I agree with you. Really for really analytics, machine learning to be effective, it really needs to operate on fairly large data sets, and a lot of times you don't have that training data that you mentioned to really train these algorithms. But having large collections of data, that's when the interesting anomalies start to pop out. And whether those are anomalies in how humans are acting, or whether it's anomalies in how systems are acting. But I think also having those large data sets allows you to start to correlate different events occurring across your enterprise within that data. And we've had a lot of success in using something called the MITRE attack framework, where MITRE has essentially decomposed hundreds of real world attacks into a set of tactics and techniques and laid this all out in a framework. And a particular tactic is interesting in and of itself, but may or may not be an actual attack. It could be somebody in your ID department running PowerShell that could be used by an attacker, it could be used by people in your IT department. But when you start to correlate the data and start to look across large data sets, that's when you can start to string together these different events to say, hey, that doesn't look like an IT person anymore. That looks like a particular threat actor based on the MITRE attack techniques and how things are sequenced in their framework. So the key is to have large data sets that you could run these algorithms across. And the challenge in most networks is they have very fractured security stacks. They have a lot of point solutions that were probably built up over the years to be able to address certain cybersecurity monitoring needs. And these tools aren't well connected or integrated. And so you're trying to run analytics by looking through a soda straw at a particular data point tool. So really, how do you pull this data together, normalize it, and be able to operate across a much larger data set? And I think that's the challenge in being able to move forward on machine learning and any type of algorithms.
Yep, totally agree with that one.
One thing though is, it's great if the good guys can use machine learning to improve their defenses, but are the bad guys, are they using ML to increase the speed of their attacks?
Yes.
No denial service using ML.
There's a great one. I've been using this example a lot. So mass personalization of phishing campaigns
Yeah.
using flavors of machine learning. And so I think it's a great example. I mean, it's horrific, it's terrible, because it means that the bad guys are getting more opportunities to have an errant click on a
Have a
link.
lot more money.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. AI is an equal opportunity tool for good guys and for bad guys.
And it's not just bad guys when you say generic, right? There's nation state, as we started at the beginning of the call. And so there's a lot more folks that are interested in collecting this information for a variety of reasons, right? And so it makes it much more difficult to keep up because some of them are very well funded.
Yeah, and I was just
Whatever
going
is-
to key on the. I was just going to key on the
Go
funding
ahead.
thing that Alex mentioned. You know, they're certainly using AI on the attacker side of the equation, and you know, particularly with ransomware, it's very lucrative, and a lot of these organizations are very well funded, probably better funded than the folks trying to develop cybersecurity, you know, defensive tools. So they have lots of money to invest in these cutting edge technologies, and they certainly take advantage of it. Ian had a great example, you know, using AI to produce, you know, more believable phishing campaigns by injecting with all kinds of personal information that they can harvest off of social media and other things, and injecting those into the phishing campaign. So yeah, they're absolutely using it.
And they're learning from each other, which is also, so it's not individual groups, not that they don't, it's not that they're in silos, they are talking and amongst themselves. So
Well, it's an interesting follow-up to the whole idea of supply chain, right? Because I think the thing that I usually, when I'm talking to people who are not steeped in cybersecurity on a daily basis, they're always surprised when I talk about the specialization of attackers these days. And so you'll have a different individual who does the initial compromise, and then they'll sell that access through an access broker to somebody else. Maybe a different ransomware group who will take advantage of that access and deploy their ransom, and then they'll sell it on. So you actually have specialized threat actors now at different stages of the attack, and that's just really a reflection of the maturity of the threat landscape that's out there today.
How much of the ransomware would go away if there wasn't a cryptocurrency? Because it seems like a lot of those are taking advantage of buying blockchain, Bitcoin, to pay off the attacker. If there wasn't Bitcoin, what would happen? Would they use a different currency, or how would that work?
There's been versions of that for so long. I know on the consumer side, you know, you have things like gift cards, Amazon or Play or other gift cards. There's been a lot of different ways of getting at people being able to pay and monetize these things. So, you know, crypto's made it easier in the sense that there's less from the consumer, from the person that has to do to be able to send it, and it becomes more international. You can move it around faster, but there's other versions of being able to move money around.
I do have a follow-up question on the ML topic, right? So is when selecting the ML algorithm for threat detection, is explainability a key criterion that you guys are looking for as CISOs?
I'm not sure I heard or understand what you did. You say explainability? Is that what you said?
Explainability, yeah, be able to explain this from outside audit perspective, right? Or that's something probably beyond the scope. Like when you look at monitoring packets in the network, or I mean, turning down a particular connection. Is that something? Because I know a lot of the neural nets today that when you train your data, it's really a black box training.
Yeah, I mean, I think CISOs are certainly interested in metrics around cybersecurity, but I haven't had anybody ask about any you know, data related to our machine learning algorithms or any of our analytics. You know, I think what they're really trying to do is understand kind of where they are today from a risk standpoint, and trying to understand that they have some downward trend in risk to show that they're kind of getting a good return on investment for their cybersecurity investments. But they certainly, I haven't had anybody kind of poking that hard to try and understand what the secret sauce is in our machine learning algorithms.
I see. Yeah. All right. I think moving on to our final questions for tonight, and then we're going to open up the floor for everyone's. Matt will help us curate a couple of questions. So many of the speakers today, I mean, probably have bought, invested, or raised money in cybersecurity. So could you please kind of shed some light on some of the emerging trends in cyber defense? In your opinion, what are some interesting new cyber players in the market today? So should we start with Jason?
So yeah, well, I could tell you just this past week, one of the big things that I'm starting to see is what the cyber insurance companies are requiring of the organizations to be capable of actually getting cyber insurance. If you're thinking of the trends, that is probably one of the biggest, to a point, coming from a risk look at it, you're almost putting the requirement is going to cost you more. In some cases, and I'm not sure, this is me just speculating on this because I haven't been able to dig in real deep into this yet, but it's almost the requirements for getting the cyber insurance is going to take you more money to do all of the mitigations than it will cost you to get the insurance, but you can't get the insurance without the mitigations. It's just, so the cost of all of that and what is going to be required is a huge trend just to combat all of the stuff that's going on right now. So building that, just knowing what your insurance company is going to ask is going to dictate a lot of how the architecture is going to be developed. That's the first. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say yes, and little statistic. So I'm still waiting to see more kind of macro cyber insurance statistics, but for 2021, at least in a single market in Canada, the size of the cyber insurance premiums was approximately $220 million a year. So not huge, but the size of the cyber insurance payouts was closer to, I think it was 600 to 800 million. So by the way, folks, that's the wrong direction. You want the payouts to be less than the premiums. And so what we're seeing is that people who had cyber insurance last year, the year before, either can't get it, the price has gone way up, or something else. And so there has been, I think, a bit of a reckoning now, especially with the spate of ransomware attacks. Just they were just so prolific, so many people got hit, and it costs so much money that now the risk calculus on the insurance provider side is appearing to change. And so what does that mean? Do you go without insurance? Do you, to Jason's point, do you spend just a fortune and try and get bank grade security for your manufacturing business? Or what? I'm not sure what the other option is, but I think it's a huge problem. I don't yet see a solution, but it's definitely a huge problem.
I mean, I'd throw on the table a couple of things that we've talked about tonight. Somebody threw out at least once or twice zero trust. I think that's certainly something that is up and coming. I mean, it's been around for probably about a decade now, but people have struggled with how to actually move to zero trust. But the U.S. government, with included in the recent executive order, a mandate to move towards zero trust, and I think that's driving a lot of good discussions in how you kind of implement zero trust from a practical standpoint, particularly in an existing network where you're not greenfields deploying something new. How do you kind of retrofit your current environment to move you in that direction? So I see that as kind of up and coming. I kind of mentioned, integration of data for this machine learning analytics problem space. So you're starting to see a lot more vendors offering open API interfaces into their tools to allow better integration of tools. So I think that's a good trend moving forward. I hope to see more of that. I think kind of another trend is a lot of organizations, particularly when you talk small, medium business, just don't have the expertise to be able to kind of defend their networks against the kind of the known attacks. But when we start talking about these stealthy unknown attacks, they just don't have the expertise to be able to do that. They don't have the tools to be able to do that. So many of them are turning to some sort of a managed security service provider, MSSP, or a managed detection and response MDR vendor that essentially provides that 7x24 monitoring for them and has that expertise. So I think that's another positive trend and something that will help out these smaller organizations that, as I said, just don't have the expertise. And then I would say kind of the final area is, kind of the holy grail is getting to more automated response. But the challenge there has always been, do you have enough confidence in your detections to be able to have an automated response from a detection? Because if you're not careful what you're doing there, you can certainly deny service to yourself by responding to something that may be a false positive. So I think, with machine learning, improvements there, it'll boost the confidence in the alerts that are being generated within the system to the point where you can start to look at more automated response, and this will certainly help in a number of fronts. It'll help to do more real-time, kind of positive actions to block attacks, but also help with the severe cyber, expertise shortage across all the different industries by having more automation in the tools.
I'll jump in. I think that in our space, there's just been a really lot of interesting activity. I think there's two big trends. One of them is that increasingly companies are moving away from endpoint solutions and trying to provide more holistic approach to cybersecurity for users, right? You see a lot of activity in like the Nortons of the world, or Aura, which recently was a roll-up of 5 or 6 different companies trying to provide a more holistic approach to what cybersecurity is for users, recognizing that attacks are not just, protected by a VPN on your computer or something on your phone. And so I think that there's a lot of just interesting movement there. The other one is we're starting to see, because of all the work from home, a lot of players that have provided, more traditionally enterprise level tools, some of those tools coming down to the kind of either user or the SMB type level, network monitoring, a lot of these other interesting things, as Chris was mentioning, like the MSSPP ones. So I think that both those spaces, those create a lot of really interesting opportunities.
Thank you, Alex. Yep.
So a couple of questions. Alex, you're really, in terms of your model, I think you're helping individuals, grandparents, parents, individuals. What kind of advice do you give them? I mean, I think everyone's very interested. What can we do to protect our Macintosh?
We're working with a few folks in government and to create like the NIST framework for consumers. So it's really just a structured approach to what it means to have complete protection for a consumer. And so there's a lot of different vulnerabilities that you could have. It's your data, it's your home, devices, all these pieces. But ultimately, 90% of the successful attacks are based on people not having good cyber hygiene, right? And so it is things like password management. It is things like using multi-factor authentication. What we found is that because there's so many things being thrown at people, and people in generally, as we talked about in this panel, are not cybersecurity experts, they don't know what are the key things to do. And part of what we do is break it down. What is that 20% of things you can do that are going to give you that 90% protection from most of the common attacks? And so it's a combination of having a holistic view as well as making sure you're doing those cyber hygiene components.
I'm going to add one more thing on there, Alex. One of the things that I think is really missing in the overall communication, especially at the individual level, is why is it important? Why does somebody want your information? What is it that they're actually doing with it? I mean, I've had friends that have gotten email hacked or something, and they go, what are they doing? They're just going to, all this can be is that they're just, pranking other people with my email address. What else could they be doing with this? They don't understand what is actually the threat, why this is actually even important. And it's just a big issue in the whole, in just the conversation of security at the individual level that I think is majorly missing.
Jason, if my team heard you, they'd probably try to hire you. Exactly. I think that the personalization and the why are two key components that we are really focused on. Like, why is it important for you? The thing that we're recommending, that why is it important for you? And like, how does it protect you? That's a big piece that drives a lot of the inaction. People don't know why it matters or why it matters to them.
Yep. And it goes, and it, we're all human. So at some level, we are all dealing with this, no matter what size of organization that we're working with. I do deal with a lot of smaller, on my personal side. Wife runs an accounting company. I'm her CISO, I guess you could call it for her. She probably is one of the most secure bookkeeping accounting companies. Anyway, even her companies, the small businesses that she works with, they don't even understand. They don't know why they need to be doing some of the stuff that they are being told to do. And it's like, why do I need to do this? This makes it so much more problematic, which is what we talked about earlier, causes me more, can I just not give everybody access to everything and just deal with it? I trust these people. Those are the challenges that we're facing.
The other question I had is, there's a big shift towards moving applications to the cloud, Amazon, Azure, Oracle, and that gives some benefits, right? You're putting your applications in the hands of experts. You've got a team at AWS with 1,000 security experts giving you best of breed, but also it's all concentrated, so everything is a little more standardized. So can you guys talk about the pros and cons of this consolidation of applications under these cloud vendors? I mean, it's at some level it takes away some risk, but it also concentrates risk.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily be concerned about concentration or risk, but just to kind of correct something you said. You said that putting your application in the cloud makes it more secure, and that's not the case. I mean, the cloud infrastructure itself is certainly more secure because you have the army of Amazon, folks monitoring that environment and keeping it secure and up to date. But if you're lifting an application out of your data center and putting it into the cloud, and that application is just as secure as it was in your data center for all intents and purposes. So it's your responsibility when you move something in the cloud. You have to focus on making sure that application that you deploy to the cloud is secure, that you're managing it properly, and really how you operate that application in the cloud is a lot different than how you'd operate it in a data center. So there's lots of different things to think about, different ways to secure the application in the cloud. So I think that's part of the challenge for most organizations that don't have a lot of cloud experience, is trying to understand, kind of what they need to do differently to properly secure that application when they deploy it into the cloud.
So I see a question from Jim Brandt. He's basically asking, and this is probably a good question for Alex, what is some antivirus software you recommend just to give you some basic security? And maybe that's in conjunction with 3GO.
Yeah, that's probably a longer response, but I think for the vast majority of our users, what we've seen is that things like Chrome and Apple, some of these key providers have really upped their game in terms of protection. And so in some cases, leveraging those technologies to protect yourself is enough, right? It depends on your risk profile. And so for some folks, having like a VPN or a firewall, other things can be helpful if they're doing a lot of travel, if they're handling sensitive materials, et cetera. But what we see is that most people don't actually take advantage of some of the features that are inherent in their browser and their computers, right? And so Apple and others have done an amazing job recently in providing more protections and locking down aspects of the computer. And so my main advice, depending on the user, is to really think about the types of tools that you're using, the browser or others, and make sure that you're using those protections. If you feel that you are in a state where you need more, come to 3GO or look at some of these other pieces that can help you.
Anybody else with some recommendations?
I think security is often so the cybersecurity industry as a whole is very vendor centric, and so for every problem there's always a solution to solve that problem. And so I would actually go the other way, rather than looking at what software to buy, be it Norton, Malwarebytes, etc., I would actually focus on process. And so the process for a consumer would be things like never reuse the same password. It would be back up your files, and it would be, if there's ever a choice to use multi-factor authentication or that little box that says text me a 4-digit code, do that. And if you can do those 3 things, you are going to be light years ahead of everybody else. Then you can start worrying about how do you properly lock down your device. But like Alex was saying, the platforms themselves are doing a really good job. As long as you stay up to date and make use of those built-in features, the platforms are doing a great job of keeping you safe from the riffraff.
Yeah, and the key there, Ian, is keep the system up to date. So make sure you turn on automatic updates for not only your operating system but the applications as well, so that everything does automatically update. And that goes a long way to making sure that you're protected against whatever the evolving threat is.
And maybe don't use log4j if you want to do some logging in Java, just to bring it back.
So I will just add one thing for keeping things updated, and I see this especially on the individual level. So many routers out there have not been updated since they've been purchased. I mean, that even though that might not, it sounds small, but that is like, if there's an opportunity to have a vulnerability, it's right there getting into your network. So even your router needs to be updated on a regular basis, especially on the individual level.
That's really helpful. Dan Bach has a question. I think it's really about disruption and sort of, McAfee, the company's been around for 30 years in different incarnations, and Norton's been around a long time. But how much of cybersecurity is going to be the upstarts versus the incumbents? Who's going to really be winning in helping individuals and companies protect themselves?
Well, from my perspective, cybersecurity, just the industry, has very different dynamics than, say, advertising. I mean, if you're in advertising, if you're not Google, if you're not Facebook, and to a lesser extent, maybe Amazon, it's really hard to be relevant. Whereas cybersecurity, you have a host of players. You have Microsoft, you have Google, you have Apple, who each own huge swaths of the market. But then you have just absolutely monster companies that are out there doing very niche things. Like CrowdStrike, for instance, has been a huge success over the last couple of years in the public markets. And arguably, they're fairly narrow in the features that they provide. They just do it really, really, really well. And so I think that from my perspective, it's going to be a mix. There is going to be consolidation. I think also just where we are in the macro cycle, I suspect that there would certainly be a wave of consolidation. But I don't see any key drivers indicating that there will be a consolidation down to a limited number of participants anytime soon. But this is a personal view, and I mean, put it to Alex, Jason, and Chris to see if you guys disagree.
I would add,
one of the things that I'm concerned about is the consolidation, because then you'll have these companies like, I can solve all security problems, and then you should probably run screaming away from them as fast as you possibly can, because there's not. I've been in meetings with some companies, I will not name them here, that have said, well, we would have solved that problem. We would have seen that problem. If our system was in there, that wouldn't have never happened. WannaCry would never have happened. Blah, blah, blah would never have happened. It's like, you're not, there's great. Your AI is great to be able to track and solve all that, but you're making me want to leave the room right now, because you come across as too confident in your software when it hasn't been out that long, so it's a layered approach. I think we're going to be in for the foreseeable future. A layered security approach is really the only real answer to a lot of what we're dealing with for this foreseeable future.
and maybe to follow on that, because I completely agree. what I've seen is that, especially in this industry, where people are taking the playing book from other tech companies, in that they're starting to add, like acquire, to add to that multi-layered approach. And so when they see interesting new technologies, they're very willing to pull the trigger and bring them on. And the interesting thing about this industry is that the threats are constantly evolving. So there's always a new solution for a new type of threat. And the question is, does that solution encompass enough of the problem to be a solution on its own, or does it get layered and added on to another solution? And oftentimes it's an addition to, as opposed to just it by itself.
I mean, I think there's a shocking statistic. I think there's something like 1,200 plus cybersecurity companies doing different niche things. And I think a lot of people are overwhelmed. Like, how many systems can I have, and how can I track all this information? And, you need systems to summarize the system. So it gets overwhelming. But I think that leads to the other question is, so Perry was asking about MDR. I think this is one Chris can probably talk to, but can you talk a little about sort of these trends in XDR and MDR, and like what size companies really could use that?
Yeah, no, I could certainly talk about that. And I've talked about integration, and to kind of wrap up on all of the point solution discussions, I think people are drowning in data. Security operations teams are just drowning in data, and so if you have too many point solutions out there, if things aren't integrated together, then you've got the poor analysts kind of swiveling in their seat trying to look at 12 different tools and kind of glue the pieces together in their head. So I think that's the challenge with a bunch of point solutions. You take it to the other extreme, vendors trying to sell the entire suite of cybersecurity tools as a single vendor solution. Most organizations don't have the luxury to rip and replace everything that they have in their inventory and replace it with a single vendor solution. So I think you're going to see kind of a mix of both. But when you talk about something like a managed detection and response vendor, the key there is you have a vendor that's trained on a bunch of different tools, and they either come in and deploy a particular tool that they like to use in your environment, or they essentially get the feed from tools that you have, and they essentially can bring those into the dashboard and kind of deal with your tools and your data. I think most of them have their preferred tool set, so they're probably going to want to try and push a particular set of tools, but they don't. Even the MDR vendors don't go with a single kind of vendor solution. They'll have multiple tools from multiple vendors, and they'll kind of string them together into their own the way they like to operate, and what they find to be effective as far as a mix of tools and a way to integrate all those together to be able to provide their MDR services. But MDR, we see customers adopting that across the board. It tends to be more of the smaller organizations that just don't have the horsepower, on their staff to be able to do cybersecurity monitoring. You get into some larger companies that are going with MDR, primarily because it's probably more cost effective for them. But when you get to the largest of the enterprises, they tend to have the in-house resources to be able to do their own monitoring. So many of them aren't going to MDR. So it's kind of the bottom end of the large into the small medium is where you see MDR being deployed or adopted, I should say.
Ian, it looks like Plurilock recently went through a public filing. Could you talk a little bit about that journey? I hope I'm catching that right.
I don't think we have enough time to go through the whole. I mean, it's a good story too, because we went public during COVID, and yeah. I mean, look, I think that the cybersecurity landscape has seen a lot of go publics over the last while. I mean, I mentioned CrowdStrike, and I just double checked. I mean, they're a $38 billion market cap company, and they're a point solution. I mean, one could argue they're a platform now, but they're effectively a point solution, and they only do one thing. They cover a lot of threats, but they're effectively an EDR provider, and I think it just goes to show how large the cyber market opportunity is. I mean, for us, the reason that we went public is we saw that there actually are a bunch of acquisition opportunities, and we wanted a public share currency to be able to go after those. And so that was why we opted to go down that road. And so we've effectively bifurcated the company. We have a effectively an acquisition arm, and then we also have our own native software that we build and market and sell. But we're just responding to the fact that the market is so fragmented, that there are so many disparate solutions out there, and that a certain level of, I wouldn't say centralization, but certainly being able to pull together a number of solutions and be able to say, look, here's a blob. I don't have a good trademark term for it, but here's a blob of tools for you that are nicely integrated, that work really well, that can cover this patch. You've still got this whole swath that you have to deal with, but there's at least this patch. And so ultimately we can hopefully provide more value. The key drivers that I keep coming back to is the fact that there's such a shortage of talent that the defenders inside companies need. They need more done for them. They cannot go and integrate the 95 different vendors themselves that they need to secure their enterprise. And so a certain amount of pre-building that work for them will ultimately meet their objective of trying to stay safe. Without saying we can do everything, but certainly, here's a patch. So hopefully that provides some color.
That's great. And then Alex, you recently went through a fundraising process. Probably good timing in the sense that it was before all the things that have happened recently, but could you give us a little color on how that went and what was sort of the fundraising environment for cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ours specifically, because we're mostly consumer oriented, we do have a B2B2C component there, but a lot of investors saw us as, how do you build a brand type of company, which they have difficulty with. And I think that ultimately the question becomes, do we need to build a brand because there's just such a need for a holistic solution out there. We had a lot of companies recently in the last month or so come to us and say, we really want a solution like yours for our work at home employees, for example. That suddenly changed the investor framework very quickly. And so we went from a few companies not really, VC is not really interested in us, to us having to stop folks from investing because we were oversubscribed. And so I think that there's just a lot of interest in this space. And a lot of folks haven't figured it out, especially on the consumer. And so somebody that can do it, I think there's just tons of opportunity. And so yeah, we were oversubscribed. We raised 2 million. That's enough to get the next space for us. But we were very excited to make connections, and we always want to make new connections with folks that may be strategic.
Great. Well, we really want to thank everyone for joining. Any closing comments from the panelists?
Thank you for having us and for having the consumer view.
I think this is awesome. This is really great. I would look forward to doing this again at some point. The one closing comment, I guess, as an investor myself, in a software company, the one thing that I really want the software companies that I personally invest in to have to, if at the minimum, have a secure development lifecycle built into their development process. So really, my thoughts: any tech company needs to be a security company going forward. At this point, if they don't look at themselves as that they have at the data from a security and very security conscious, I really don't want to take. I'm not putting my money in with them. So, just as you know, being that this is a bunch of angel investors that are listening to it, if it's not, it really needs to be top of mind for all of the tech companies that are going out there that are coming into play.
Great to chat and great conversation. I actually just put my email in the chat box there. So if anybody has questions, either like, hey, how do I secure my company? Happy to chat. Or I'm an angel investor myself. If you guys want, a second look at a deal. And to Jason's point, there's a lot of fintech companies out there that are way behind in their security journey. And actually, one of those common questions I hear from fintech companies is, hey, we just raised a round. People are asking about, SOC 2 compliance. Like, what does that mean? How do we get there? So those types of questions are super common, and happy to chat with folks and just provide back however I can.
Yeah, I want to echo on what Jason and Ian mentioned. Especially, I've led a couple of due diligence in the past as well, right? I definitely think cybersecurity should be part of DD, and then we definitely need to look at how companies are handling and budgeting for cybersecurity. That's actually pretty important. Chris, sorry to cut you off. If you have any closing comments, yeah, go for it.
No, I think I echo what everybody else said. Certainly a pleasure to be on the panel tonight. I always enjoy talking with everybody else. Always interesting questions.
Awesome. Yep. So on that note, I think we're at 7:14 right now. It's a good segue, and I would like to just for general administrative announcement that we have a private equity panel coming up. So tech trend in private equity coming up in March. More details will be announced very, very shortly. And lastly, I want to thank all the panelists for joining us tonight. It's such a pleasure having you all, and it's been a very lively and I would say intriguing discussions. Thank you all for joining, and I will see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.